I'm recording my homily for the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time in 2018. And this week we had some great readings. I'm going to talk about the second reading about St. Paul. And you have this moment where he's at the high point of his ministry. He's doing fantastic, right? But there's something going on in him spiritually that's really important for us to pay attention to, okay? So I'll be getting to that. But then also in the gospel, you have this moment where Jesus is talking about what it's like to be a prophet in his own hometown. And he says, you can be a prophet anywhere except in your own hometown, because people really struggle to accept that kind of message when it's from one of their own. So even Jesus struggled with that, right? So if you struggle preaching the faith, sharing your faith with your family members and your friends, just recognize Jesus also had trouble with that, right? But it's the last line in the gospel that I'm just going to mention really quickly as a way to begin my homily. So the very last line of the gospel was, he said, so he's speaking about the people of where he grew up, right? Because they're rejecting him. He said he was amazed at their lack of faith. Jesus was amazed at their lack of faith. Now that's a phrase I hope I never hear Jesus say about me, or that we don't have to hear him ever say it about our families or our parishes, right? Wow, Jesus was just so amazed at their lack of faith. that would just be like a knife in the heart, right? It's not to say that we're perfect, but to have God just be so amazed at how pathetic we're doing. So obviously we don't want that. Now, what I do want to talk about, though, is the opposite of that. And that's what Jesus desires. The opposite is he's just amazed at how much we're growing in holiness, right? And so you say, what is the ultimate desire of God? It's that we are growing as his children, as his sons and daughters. We are growing in holiness. We are opening our hearts to allow ourselves to be his image to others, to the world, right? We are being in his image and likeness, and we're allowing his grace to shine forth. So to grow in holiness, that's what God desires, which is the opposite of a lacking of faith. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because it's not intuitive. It's not always completely natural for us to understand how that happens. Sometimes it's the exact opposite of what we would naturally think. Naturally speaking, if you want to grow in something, there's certain steps that have to happen. But in faith, sometimes it's the opposite of what you would think. Okay? All right, we'll get to that. I've been reading a book on Mother Teresa. It's a really thin book, but it's very specific about her dark night. And so her dark night, if you've never heard that term used before, it's a spiritual term that we use about mystical theology, about the spiritual life, the dark night of the soul. And so we'd say that, so Mother Teresa would say that she suffered with, or she was struggling with, the dark night of the soul for 50 years. For 50 years. So what does that mean? Well, in this book, it talks about how in her prayer for 50 years, she never felt any connection to God. She never felt like there was a conversation happening. She never felt like God was speaking to her during her prayer. She never felt this warm and these feelings of consolation in her prayer, like God was telling her constantly, everything you're doing is right, that's good, that's great. She never felt any of that. And that seemed like very counterintuitive. You say, wait a minute, she's like the superhero of Catholic saints, right? She has gone way beyond what most people would ever even think of doing in terms of living the faith. And so you think, well, she must have been so close to God in her daily prayer. And she had a really good daily prayer routine. I mean, she was spending a lot of time in prayer. And then for her to come out and say, look, I felt nothing. I felt like I was just in a desert. In fact, she would come out and she would say, now the thing is, Mother Teresa didn't share this with people when she was during her time when she was alive. The only people she ever shared this with was selectively certain priests or spiritual directors that she had. And even then, she was very coy about it. This was something that she guarded very close to her heart. But she would even sometimes go as so far to say that she felt like she was just completely abandoned by God. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, okay. It couldn't have been that bad, right? I mean, if God is that light and God has separated himself from Mother Teresa to draw her, right, to help her grow, but there's always going to be the light. There's always going to be that little flicker of light that's going to draw her. And so, she's always going to know which direction to go. Or if you say a spiritual compass, her spiritual compass was always going to point in the right direction towards God. That's not the dark night, though. The dark night is when that light is extinguished completely. That light is gone. The compass no longer points to God. And you say, well, why? Why would God allow that? Why would God create that situation? Think about it. You want to grow in faith? You want to grow in faith? Then it means to walk when there's no light, right? It means to follow God when the compass isn't pointing to God. I mean, it's when we need to surrender to complete and pure faith. Just absolute faith when we feel nothing. And yet we persevere. We continue on. And that's what Mother Teresa did. Now, the author of this book, Father Paul Murray, he would remind us that there's a difference between the dark night and depression. So depression is when a person feels like they've been abandoned, when they're lonely, when they're isolated. But depression is caused by woundedness. Depression is caused by deep hurts that have happened. And so it's an emotional and psychological state where the person begins to turn in on themselves because of the wounds, right? It's like a wounded animal who's curling up because they're wounded. And so that's depression, which is very different than the dark night. The dark night is something that comes from the outside. It is God acting. And then that person responds by continuing on, by focusing even more, by striving more. Mother Teresa would say in some of her letters that, she would go on about how she felt abandoned and she felt nothing for God. There was nothing there. And yet she would always finish by saying, but I love him. I long for him. I desire him in my life. And so that's what the dark night is. It's impelling us to something more. Now, as we talk about a couple things. Did you notice the last sentence in the gospel? He was amazed at their lack of faith. So the dark night extinguishes anything that would in some ways provide a crutch or a support for faith. And so it creates an environment in which pure faith, just total complete lack of trust, total complete trust in God is now necessary to continue. So it's the opposite, right? You see my connection? Okay, great. Now, what was I going to say after that? Oh, yes. Now, a person, though, may say, but that just doesn't seem right? That just doesn't seem right. Why would God do that? It seems like we're strongest when we're closest, when we're supported, when we're, arms locked in arms and we're a team, and it seems counterintuitive. But let me put it this way. You have Mother Teresa. She's helping the poorest of the poor, but she's also helping people who are completely abandoned, people who have no support network, people who've been abandoned by their families, or maybe they've committed really horrible sins and so they abandon their families. Whatever it may be, they are completely alone. If Mother Teresa did not understand that in her own life, perhaps she would never truly love them the way she would love them if she herself felt completely abandoned. Does that make sense? God was giving her the opportunity the environment to feel completely united to those who had been abandoned. And so she could look at them face to face as a brother and as a sister and say, I know what it feels like. And so he's given her a great gift, the capacity not just to have complete and pure faith, but the capacity to love those who've been completely abandoned and to know what it feels like to have empathy and sympathy for that. Now, as I'm saying that, you're probably thinking, if that's what true faith is, if that's what it takes to be like Mother Teresa, forget it, right? But don't think of it that way, because God's grace always provides. Now look at the life of St. Paul. St. Paul today, everything's going really, really good, right? But then he says that I, Paul, might not become too elated because of the abundance of the revelations, because of the abundance of all the grace that was happening and everything that was happening in his life. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, an angel of Satan to beat me, to keep me from being too elated. And so he's understanding this dark night. Whatever that thorn in the flesh was, there was something in his life that was going to keep him humble so that he would always remember that it was not him. It was not him doing it. It was not him who he was working for. He was doing this all for God, and he would also be more humble with the people whom he served. Whereas if somebody's got it all together, you say, yeah, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. I don't have any lack of faith in my life. Everything's perfect. In the end, they're going to become arrogant. And so God gives this thorn in order to bring him back down, right? Now, 3 times I begged the Lord about this, that it might leave me. 3 times. You can imagine that it must have been just absolutely gut-wrenching for whatever this struggle was that he had, this dark night, that he begged God to free him from it. And this is what God said to him: my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. Power is made perfect in weakness. That is like such the opposite of what we think in our world. But I know I'm standing here, I don't have a cross behind me, but you look at the cross and it's like, now it makes complete sense. Yes, that's what he did. He poured himself out completely. He was willing to suffer a most humiliating and horrible death, uniting himself to our state, paying for our sins, right? But doing it out of love for us. It's a very humble way. What other God in the world has ever suffered such humiliation for his children, for his creation? Okay, now I'm going to go into some practical examples in our own life, because here's the reality. I think all of us have at least had some kind of a taste of the dark night. So the dark night is not caused because we've done something horrible, because we've sinned and so we separated ourselves from God. That's not the dark night. That's sin. That's bad. The dark night is something positive that God is doing, okay? And it usually means we're growing in our faith, and so he's going to provide that environment for us to grow even more and develop an even purer faith, purer trust in him. So it's like pulling the hood over the head or putting the blindfold on. You have to have complete trust. And so that's the dark night. Now, we've all had some taste of it. And perhaps for many of us, when we did, we probably ran screaming. It's like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. This is really difficult. My mom would share the story that one time she was really doing good in her faith. And so she asked God for a cross. She asked God to give her some suffering so that she could do it for others, because she was just feeling really, really strong. She said, God, I can do more. Well, God gave her more. God gave her a lot more. And then she said, that was the last time I prayed that prayer. But, so it's having that that place, right? When God begins to give us perhaps a dark night, or we see somebody else going through it. Now, I want to talk about prayer, because prayer tells us if we're open to, really and truly open to that kind of faith, or we're not, right? So here's one of the obstacles to really growing in faith in God. Listen to your prayers. Listen to what you say in prayer. Do you ever pray for God to make life easier? God, give me better health because I'm suffering right now, so give me health. Or God, give my spouse healing because she's suffering or he's suffering in this particular manner. Take away the suffering. Bring healing, right? Help us with our financial problems that we have. Or help my child who's rebelling right now. But you listen carefully. And in all of those prayers, it's, Lord, make my life easier. Now, we may not think of it that way, but that's essentially what we're praying for. And that's not a prayer of faith. It's not a prayer of trust. In some ways, it's the opposite, isn't it? Lord, make it so I don't need as much faith today. Lord, make it so I don't need so much to rely on so much hope. Lord, make it so I don't need to have to show so much charity, so much compassion, or so much forgiveness. Make my life a little bit easier. We pray that way, don't we? We do. Now, we don't necessarily want to pray that way. Or if we are, we at least want to tell Jesus, hey, Jesus, my faith is really weak right now, so I'm just asking for a little bit of help. I'm drowning. And to say, my faith is faltering. Okay, it's like Peter who's falling into the sea. He thought he could walk on water, but now his faith is faltering. And so we call that to mind and say, Lord, my faith is faltering. I'm struggling right now. Okay, so we name it. But by and large, as we grow in our faith, our prayer should sound different, shouldn't it? And so we're not looking to take away people's crosses. We're not looking to make their life easier or with less suffering. But we're praying that our lives can be a more pure manifestation of God's work. So, a couple examples. When you wake up in the morning and you're saying your morning prayers, you can say, Lord, how can I help you today? How can I help you today? When you call a place, a business, or you walk into a business and the first thing a person says is, how can I help you today? You're like, wow, this is great. They already want to help me, right? As opposed to, what do you want? What do you want? In other words, it's like, you want something from me and I just want to know what it is. That's not the best situation, right? But if somebody says, how can I help you today? Lord, how can I help you today? Lord, who can I help today? What's my mission today, Lord? Or it can be even a humbler prayer is, Lord, you don't need to tell me my mission today, but please help me to have the graces to do what you want me to do today, or to say what you want me to say today, or not say what I shouldn't say today. Help me in that area. Help me just to be a better servant to you. Or how can I grow today, Lord? How should I be trying to grow today? Should I be trying to grow in patience today? And then the morning prayer can focus on that and say, Lord, help me to grow in patience today. So it might be tempting to say, Lord, just take away this cross so I don't need that much patience. No. Lord, help me to grow in patience today. Okay? Or your evening prayer, your night prayer can be, Lord, I am truly sorry for losing my patience with my kids, or for what I said to my spouse. I am truly sorry. Help me to get better. Instead of saying, Lord, help my kids to change so I don't need to have so much patience, right? Help my kids, help my wife to see it my way. That's a natural side, but that's not true faith. You hear the difference? right? The other part I want to talk about a little bit, so prayer is very important. Really take this lesson to heart. How we pray opens our heart, or shows us, if you will, how open our heart is to really and truly God's will and what God's trying to do. Okay? Because our prayer can become an obstacle. And then Jesus can turn to us based on our prayer and say, oh, it's amazing how lack of faith they have. Okay, we don't want that. All right. The second example I wanted to use is, I think in the Catholic Church we've fallen into a trap. The trap is this. I think we've tried to make it easy on parents by helping them, at least I think that was the original intent, helping them to teach their children the faith. So in faith formation, in CCD, and our RCIA classes in Catholic schools. Now, I'm not saying any of those are bad. I'm just saying I think we've slipped into a trap where we thought that we were helping our parents, we were making their life a little bit easier by taking this responsibility on and teaching their kids the faith, when in reality we should not have necessarily been doing that. Now again, I'm not saying that we need to just get rid of Catholic schools or not have faith formation programs or anything like that. But how we structure them, I think, can be much better, because I think in trying to make it easier on the parents, we're actually destroying the spiritual life of the family, or we're hindering it from growing, because there's meant to be a cross there. There's meant to be a supernatural presence in the family of the parents teaching the kids the faith. So the faith is not an academic lesson. If you look at our religion books, they often present it as an academic pursuit, an academic lesson, but it is not. It's not math, it's not history, right? Well, there's a little bit of there's history in faith, but that's not faith. Faith is a language. Faith is a language of the heart. It's a language of the soul. It's a language of supernatural love. And we learn that by example from those who love us and from those who have that supernatural love. And first and foremost, that comes from the parents. Because children, first and foremost, are most vulnerable and most open, vulnerable in the good sense, most vulnerable and open to the love of their parents, right? I mean, you see that every day when you see children with their parents. They have complete trust in their parents. So in saying this, right, it's for us to be able to say, okay, mom and dad need to be the first and primary teacher of the faith to their children, recognizing it's not just academic, it's not just in the mind, but it's teaching them to speak the language of God's love in their life. That has to come through love. Okay? All right. Now, there's a reason why in almost every single document the Catholic Church has put out on this, in the last 100 years, it'll always say the parents are the first and primary teachers of the faith to their children. And then it'll go on to talk about, all the ways that can happen. But now we're afraid to do that. We are really afraid. So in our own parish community here at St. Mary's, we're beginning a committee staffed by parents, because that's going to be part of our objective this coming year and these coming years is, how do we create systems, how do we create a structure in the parish so that it gives that cross back to the parents, right? So that they can carry that cross in a very healthy and beautiful way, and so that their faith can grow, the family's faith can grow and their children can grow and be able to speak that language of love, right? Okay. All right, God bless you, and I will see you again next week. Take care.